My name is Natalie Marzek. I manage the Zoonoses and One Health program at the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. I know a lot of people in here. And I'm also the co-PI for the RaHP VEC, which I will introduce in just a second. But this is the first of our webinar series for the Rockies and High Plains Vector-Borne Disease Center. And we're really excited to be getting this off the ground and going. So I think I can see my chat. Yeah. So I'll keep an eye on the chat if anyone throws questions in there. We are recording this, so if you are uncomfortable with being recorded, please sign off now. And if no one has any objections, we will go ahead and get started. So first, welcome to all of you to this first RaHP VEC webinar. We'll be talking about dengue, but in just a moment. But first, I wanted to give an overview of what the RaHP VEC is, where we fit in with other vector-borne disease groups, and who we have in our group. So RaHP VEC is one of the CDC TECs. So TECs are regional training and evaluation centers. These programs were set up in 2023. And there were 5 awardees for this first round. So this is similar to COE funding and ELC funding, if you're familiar, where you apply for kind of a 5-year period, and every year that it gets reviewed, you reapply, but in general, you are funded for 5 years. So the awardees for this round were Colorado State University, Penn State University, Cornell, the City of New Orleans Termite and Rodent Control Board, and the Puerto Rico Science, Technology, and Research Trust. So some academic groups, some city government, and some research groups. So the goal of the TECs is to expand the capacity to advance vector-borne disease prevention and control through training, evaluation, and partnerships. So that tripartite goal, the training, evaluation, and partnerships, is the main focus for these TECs, as opposed to research, which is what the COEs are tasked with. So the Rockies and High Plains Vector-Borne Diseases Center is made up of investigators from CSU and CDPHE, as well as Texas Tech University and the Salt Lake City Mosquito Abatement District. The region that we are hoping to serve, at least to begin with, is Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, New Mexico, and then the Texas Panhandle. We realized during the application process that this was a region that was not served by any of the COEs, and has very, very specific problems that are not necessarily shared by other parts of the country. So that was our goal in forming this group, is to be able to support vector-borne disease work, primarily in this region where some of the things we need are different than things they might need in California or Maine or Florida. And I should say, which don't tell Brian I forgot about him, because I didn't. The other PI is Dr. Brian Foy with Colorado State University. So TECs versus COEs. This is one of the typical issues with government funding, is what do all the letters mean? So the TECs, the Training and Evaluation Centers, focus on workforce development, evaluating currently used methodologies, particularly as used in the field, and building partnerships across agencies. COEs, or Centers of Excellence, are focusing on applied research, entomology training, and collaboration between academic institutions and government vector-borne disease agencies or officials. So there's more of a focus on workforce and partnership building, as well as kind of getting an idea of what is going on in and how effective our methods are. All right, so current RaHP VEC projects. And at some point in this presentation, I will give you the RaHP VEC website. It's this here. So we have Kelly, so Kelly has chatted that that participant entrance exit doorbell chime is really obnoxious. I don't know if anyone in here knows how to turn that off. I've never been able to figure it out. So if somebody knows, that would be awesome. Please let us know in the chat if you know. So the current RaHP VEC projects that are ongoing right now, we have the Ticks, Trails, and Communities project, which is through CSU, and is looking at, oh, Kate, thank you very much. I'm gonna have to screenshot that. Kate is giving us instructions on how to do it. The Ticks, Trails, and Communities is a project looking at tick-borne disease behaviors and knowledge in folks who are out in the community on trails and public land. There should be some more data coming out of that project soon, but it was the pilot basically was done earlier this summer and is very exciting. There's also mosquito surveillance and control training that's being sponsored by the Salt Lake City Mosquito Abatement District. We have local public health agency mosquito surveillance trainings being done in Colorado by Dr. Roundy, who's our medical entomologist at CDPHE, and he is supported by these RaHP VEC funds. We're supporting local responses to emerging disease vectors. We're screening local mosquito populations for insecticide resistance, which in Colorado has not really been done on a large scale. Doing surveys to determine needs and further projects that RaHP VEC will be doing. And then also developing certificate programs for students and young professionals, primarily at via Texas Tech and CSU. So this webinar is part of the training and partnerships arms of this grant. So we are hoping to provide updates on vector-borne disease topics for all of our regional partners and others across the country, and also to provide a way of networking and introducing professionals across multiple fields of vector-borne disease work to the projects and activities that are being done in other aspects of the field. We are supporting the sharing of information across jurisdictions and agencies, and also, again, promoting these partnerships and making sure that there's awareness of the activities and resources that are available through RaHP VEC and other sources. So that was my RaHP VEC spiel. Looks like some of our technical issues are being worked out, which is great. Does anyone have any questions about RaHP VEC, our goals? There's a, what am I trying to say? There's a newsletter that's being maintained by the folks up at CSU. You can sign up on the RaHP VEC website. And all of this stuff is kind of getting off the ground now, so feedback and topics for discussion, things like that, topics for future webinars, please feel free to forward on to us. You can forward it directly to me. I put my email in the chat. All right, so let's move into dengue virus. We're starting with dengue because it's been in the news a lot. There's a lot of dengue activity this summer and this year. We thought it would be a great time to review it. Okay. So this is for the folks in public health who are on this call. I'm trying to get beyond my normal public health dengue talk and try to make this a more comprehensive dengue informational session, as it were. So please feel free to put questions in the chat, to raise your hand. I'm happy to stop and answer questions. And also very, very happy to have anyone in mosquito control or environmental health or people who are not communicable disease epidemiologists like me chime in and let me know what other things we should be talking about. So I left a lot of time at the end of this presentation for discussion, and I'm hoping that maybe we can get some input from folks who are not necessarily in public health. So dengue is a flavivirus, which is important because there are a lot of flaviviruses that circulate in the world. A lot of them circulate in the same places, like dengue and Zika virus, which can make testing a little complex. There are 4 serotypes of dengue, and infection will result in lifelong immunity to the serotype you were infected with. So if I'm infected with dengue 1, I will have lifelong immunity to dengue 1. But that immunity, while it does cover other serotypes for months to maybe a couple years, that's not permanent. So while you're permanently immune to dengue 1, for instance, in my example, I will have some immunity to dengue 3, 4, and 2, but that's going to wane, and eventually I can be reinfected with another serotype. The vectors are primarily Aedes aegypti and also Aedes albopictus. So for those of us in Colorado, we do not currently have established populations of these mosquitoes. But with climate change and people moving around and bringing mosquito eggs unknowingly to other parts of the state and country, this is something that's on our radar as a potential new introduction and having Aedes endemic in our state. So people can be reinfected again, and the important thing to know about reinfection is that when you are reinfected with a new serotype, this is when you can have the severe dengue syndromes, including hemorrhagic syndrome, and we'll talk about that a little more later. Worldwide, dengue has a very big presence. So there are up to 400 million infections worldwide, with 500,000 hospitalizations and 20,000 deaths. So it's a very, it's a relatively common tropical disease. And even though we don't have local transmission in Denver, we do see, in Colorado, we do see cases regularly in travelers. So this, I think, is interesting kind of from a One Health standpoint. If we're talking about how humans are interacting with the environment and how that affects disease distribution, etc., you can see that back in the 1970s, which is the block A on the top there, the Americas and Africa really had dengue 1 and dengue 2, and those were the 2 endemic strains. But by 2004, which is block B there, you can see that most places in the world have all 4. So between people movement, mosquito movement, us transporting viruses and things all over the country as we travel back and forth between continents, we now have all 4 serotypes pretty much across the globe. And that's important because that means that there's more potential for infection, a second infection, with that higher risk of severe disease. So the methods of transmission are primarily through mosquito bite, but also it can be transmitted vertically from a pregnant person to a fetus. It can be transmitted through breast milk, and it can be transmitted iatrogenically through transfusions, transplants, and needle sticks, although those are rare. And there is the potential for sexual transmission. I don't believe this is as well established as it is for Zika or even the concerns that we have with Oropouche. But there have been documented cases where the sexual transmission seems very possible. So as we all know, arboviral symptoms can look very similar to one another. So for dengue, we see fever with aches and pains, or nausea and vomiting, or a rash. The symptoms will last a week, about a week at most, and most people will then recover. 1 in 4 people who are infected become symptomatic. So for the Coloradans out there and anyone else who deals with West Nile, we say that 20% of West Nile infections result in a symptomatic disease syndrome. It's 25% for dengue. Most people will recover in about a week. And then if severe dengue is going to start, it will be after that febrile illness has resolved, because it's based on an immune reaction. So 20 to 24 hours after your febrile illness resolves is kind of your critical period to watch out for the severe dengue syndromes. So dengue fever, as I said, is normally self-limiting. And with medical care, with supportive medical care, mortality is less than 1%. Severe dengue syndromes are dengue hemorrhagic fever and dengue shock syndrome. With medical care, the mortality is about 2 to 5%, mostly supportive care again. And then without care, the mortality can be upwards of 20%. So severe dengue. Severe dengue is most often seen in infants and folks who are having secondary dengue infections. So it's thought that the hemorrhagic fever and shock syndromes are because of this antibody-dependent enhancement, excuse me, or aid. And in this process, antibodies will attach to the pathogen, but they will be unable to neutralize it. So this is, like in my example with dengue 1 and dengue 3 infections, if I have had dengue 1 before, I have antibodies to dengue 1, and those dengue 1 antibodies are able to attach to dengue 3, but are not able to neutralize it. So those antibody antigen complexes allow entry into cells and cause a worsened immune response. This ADE has been correlated with severe infection in infants who are having their first postnatal infection, which is why the thought is that it's likely what causes the severe dengue syndrome. And I believe the reason we see it in infants is because they do often have some maternal antibody to at least one of the dengue serotypes. So they're having a similar, it's almost like they're having their second infection because they've got the parents, immune response and antibodies to the other serotype. This was a new, heads up, this was a new concept for me, so I may not have explained it very well. Feel free to, if you know more about it, we can chat about it later because I find it fascinating. Okay, so testing for dengue. Primarily what we see in public health is serologic testing for IgM antibodies. The problem with this is that it's nonspecific. Flaviviruses will cross-react on IgM testing. So Zika and dengue and West Nile, and some of the other flaviviruses that we see, they'll all cross-react, which if you were working during the Zika outbreak in 2016, 2017, you may remember that was a really big deal because we couldn't distinguish a dengue infection from a Zika infection based on an IgM test alone. Plaque neutralization testing, or PRNT, can be done for somebody who has had a positive IgM, and this is flavivirus specific, so it will tell us which virus the antibody is being produced toward. However, PRNT on its own is not very helpful because it doesn't distinguish between recent and old infections. So it'll show you where what virus the antibodies are acting against, but it doesn't have that IgM, IgG ability to tell us if it's a recent infection or old. The PCR is one of my favorites because it can identify the serotype. So then you know which serotype of dengue you've been infected with. But it has to be done within 7 days of symptom onset, or there will not be enough virus in the bloodstream to find. And because of that aspect, negative tests should also be tested with IgM. So if you're running a PCR, I believe the CDC guidance is still to also run an IgM. So while we do not have treatment for dengue infections, we do or did have vaccination. So Dengvaxia is the trade name for the dengue vaccine. It's a live tetravalent vaccine that was approved by FDA for use in 2023. There are 2 other products that are available internationally that are not available in the US, and I'm not as familiar with them, so they will not be making an appearance in this presentation. Dengvaxia is given in 3 doses, 6 months apart, and again, it's tetravalent, so it protects against all 4 serotypes. The Committee on Immunization Practices did make formal on how to use Dengvaxia, and the recommendations were for children ages 9 to 16 who live in areas where dengue is common and have had a previous documented dengue infection. So the goal with Dengvaxia is to vaccinate prior to the second infection, because that's when the risk of dengue hemorrhagic fever is increased. So use it saying children 9 to 16, you're hopefully catching an age group that has already been exposed or infected to dengue, living in areas where dengue is common so that there's a higher risk of them having a second infection, and previous documented dengue infection because you want them to have already had one infection so that when you give them this vaccine, it's primarily preventing the severe dengue syndromes that would happen with a second natural infection. And the efficacy was actually pretty good. So the vaccine series protected about 80% of the time from infection, hospitalization, and severe illness. And the protection based on the trials was lasting at least 6 years, and there were thoughts that protection would be longer than that once we had some more time information to go off of. But in 2024, the manufacturer, Sanofi Pasteur, announced it's not going to be producing Dengvaxia anymore because of, quote, lack of global demand. So unfortunately, for areas where dengue is common, for instance, Puerto Rico or American Samoa, the Virgin Islands, this product will not be available. And it's unclear, at least to me, I don't know if anyone has additional information, whether or not any of the other products that are available internationally are being investigated for approval in the United States. So a little bit of epidemiology, which of course I love because I am an epidemiologist. Dengue, these are areas with dengue risk. This is from the CDC's website, and this is as of October of this year, so this month. The darker purple is showing you frequent or continuous dengue risk areas. The lighter purple is sporadic or uncertain. And the cream colored, tan, beige, is no evidence of dengue risk. So you can see there are countries where dengue is present kind of across the board. Countries where the risk is a little different depending on where you are, which may or may not be related to elevation because these mosquitoes do not like to live above 6,000-ish feet. Or there are countries like the United States where we have such different ecosystems and climates across the country that it makes for different risk depending on where you are. So you can see that in the United States, and again, this is from CDC, in the United States, we have here on the left is, cases. So this is cases by residents. And again, this is for those not familiar with some of our public health data. We count all of our cases based on where the case lives, not necessarily where they were infected, which can make interpreting some of these maps a little difficult. So for instance, you can see Colorado is showing as 50 to 249 cases over this time period. It's 2010 to 2023. That doesn't mean that we have local transmission in Colorado. All of those folks were travelers. So what's nice is that our data is also separated out by travel-related cases and locally acquired cases. So on the right, you can see the same time period, 2010 to 2023, and where locally acquired cases occurred. Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, American Samoa, these are areas that we know have not high levels, but it's common to have dengue. Florida, we're starting to see more local transmission. California is starting to see some as well. Texas also has the right climate, unfortunately, and bugs to have local transmission. We're seeing it in Hawaii as well. But you can see there are far fewer states that have endemic dengue or the potential to have a local transmission. And that includes Colorado. These are the travel-associated dengue cases by year for the whole country from 2010 to 2023. So you can see it kind of, I would say cyclic, except it's not really cyclic. what we tend to see is when there are big outbreaks internationally, we have more cases. So 2019, where we saw more cases, I believe that year might have been India, in the Indian subcontinent that was having a huge outbreak, or maybe South America. Sorry, my mind doesn't, I don't remember those things very well. And you can see in 2022 and 2023, those numbers are rising, that reported cases numbers. And I would expect that in 2024, we would see even more because of the local activity in Puerto Rico and Florida. So these were the Colorado cases from 2014 to 2023. And I'm sorry that my years aren't really matching up across different data sets. I'm working on that in the background, I promise. This is showing, so from 2014 to 2023, how many residents of Colorado were diagnosed with dengue. All of the cases were imported from out of state. We had no locally transmitted cases. And you can see that our trends tend to mirror the national trends, because most of our cases are related to international outbreaks and Coloradans traveling to those areas and coming back infected. The current outbreak is special, to say the least. So Puerto Rico is having an endemic year with a huge outbreak of dengue cases. And you can see the cases in the Americas, 1980 to 2024. This was from PAHO, the Pan American Health Association. And you can see that cases have been rising on average steadily since 1980. When you look at this graph and you're looking at 2023 versus 2024, keep in mind that these data are only through April of 2024. So we had already surpassed 2023's case count in the first almost quarter of 2024. So we have seen that these numbers are steadily climbing, and we have well outstripped 2023. And a lot of this has to do with the current activity in Puerto Rico. So this was information that I got off of a CDC webinar. The reasoning behind the Puerto Rico outbreak. They were seeing, low dengue activity from 2016 through 2023-ish. And that's because first we had the Zika epidemic, and then we had COVID. So we had different diseases circulating at the same time, and COVID, of course, making changes in our behavior based on lockdowns, etc. That meant that we had less exposure to mosquitoes that were carrying dengue. So the Puerto Rican authorities knew that there was more dengue coming. There was going to be an uptick in dengue. They were due for an outbreak. And what happened is that not only did they get their outbreak of dengue, it's a new serotype. So usually dengue 1 circulates in Puerto Rico, and this outbreak has been a lot of dengue 3, if not solely dengue 3. So we're seeing more severe infections and more disease activity because the population is naive to dengue 3. They were quoting about 50% hospitalization rate for their infected residents, which is higher than their usual, and would go along with the idea that it's a different serotype that's active, and therefore having a higher risk of severe dengue syndromes. All right, so that was all I had. We have plenty of time for discussion, which I'm excited about. You can see the RaHP VEC website here, as well as my email. I've also put those in the chat, and I can put them in the chat again right now for anyone who came in a little bit later. So I'm hoping we can open this up and we can talk about either dengue or other topics you would like to see on this webinar, other places we should be advertising it, any kind of input. I would love to have it. And I'd love to just kind of know who's on this call. I recognize a lot of names, but not necessarily, quote unquote faces. Could we do this? So does everyone know how to use the reactions at the bottom? You can raise your hand or clap or something like that. It's the little heart icon. Could you raise your hand if you work in public health? Good, it's working. Excellent. Ooh. Oh, awesome. We've got lots of public health folks. That's making me super happy. Okay, so how about this? What about those of you who are from outside of Colorado? And this can be public health or not public health. Oh, fantastic. All right. Okay, how about this one? Those of you who are not in public health, are you anybody in academics? Okay. All right, so that's helpful. We need to work on our on getting into the academics calendars. Anybody from a vector control agency? Awesome. Wonderful. Okay. Fantastic. Okay, well, thank you very much, my very unofficial, I guess, quiz there. And Maria is, okay, Maria is asking if we could review the states that presented local transmission. Let me pull that graph up for you, or that map, sorry. And share that. Okay. So here we have New York, West Virginia, North Carolina, Arizona, California, Texas, Florida, in the CONUS anyway. And Kelly from Texas is saying they were oh, sorry, I clicked the wrong thing and moved. Okay. They were laboratory transmission. I was going to say, Kelly, I can't remember what the stories were for the New York, West Virginia, plus minus North Carolina situations, but I can absolutely find out. Okay. Maria, I'll leave this up for a little bit and I'll pull it down in a minute, so it's not as distracting to me. Any ideas, any feedback on other aspects of diseases that should be added to these kinds of presentations? I didn't go into mosquito control because I don't know enough about it. But I believe Dr. Roundy from CDPHE is on the call and does know more about mosquito control if we want to talk about that. And Elizabeth is asking, oh, the goals. Yes, let me back up. Let me stop sharing so I don't make anyone nauseous. All right, and let me put this, oh, shoot, I'm sorry. See if I can copy the link. Okay, so the link is going in the chat there. And maybe we can have someone from Dr. Hemmen Schroeder's lab come on and talk about that in a future webinar, because that's pretty interesting. Any other questions? I mean, we can take people off mute, I hope.
Natalie, I had a question for you.
Erin?
Yeah. So you have quite a few cases of travel-associated dengue, but you guys also have West Nile virus. So I was wondering if you are routinely confirming those travel-associated cases with PCR or PRNT?
We are not. It's a really good point. I do have some, I guess, questions more than concerns about which flaviviruses are actually circulating in Colorado. I will say that the dengue cases all did have travel to areas where dengue is currently being transmitted, I guess is not the greatest way to say it, but that's my best try right now. And we do have evidence that in most of those cases that they have been infected in those countries. And I know our dengue epidemiologist Lauren Butler is on, so Lauren, feel free to throw stuff in the chat if I'm misspeaking or if you have things to add. So I have a low suspicion that we're getting a mix of dengue and West Nile. My bigger concern is that St. Louis encephalitis has circulated in Colorado in the past, and we don't routinely test for it. So there is a little concern that maybe we're not seeing everything. What we're seeing is not all West Nile, because I believe it was Arizona has been testing for both and are finding more and more SLE, which makes me wonder if we're seeing a similar thing since they're our close neighbor. I think I saw somebody from Arizona on. I'm not going to put you on the spot, but if you want to give us your thoughts, that would be great.
Same here. We don't routinely test for SLE. And I wonder the same thing, like how much is actually out there that we're missing or misdiagnosing. Do you have the ability at your state public health lab to test for dengue or SLE or anything besides West Nile?
Let's see. So we can do I believe we can still do that triplex PCR for Zika, dengue, and chick. We can do some additional dengue testing. We don't do it very often. It's primarily we ask that commercial labs do that testing. SLE, we do not have the ability to test for in our lab at this time.
Hey, Natalie, this is Jeff from Nebraska. So we each year open up West Nile testing at public health expense from like July through October, and any of those that are positive, we do submit to CDC for PRNT confirmation. And so far, we haven't had any SLE positives come back. It's all been West Nile so far. So we've had a couple detections in mosquito pools, but I think the most we've ever had in a single season has been like 2 positive pools. So at least here it
Okay.
doesn't seem to be circulating too much. But there is still some out there occasionally. I thought for sure we'd see some this year where it was extra. Usually it's in our wetter years we see SLE positives, the one or two that usually pop up, but didn't see any this year. And
Interesting. Thank you.
and with some of our dengue cases, we did have to send a few of those. We were able to get a hold of those because the providers did test for West Nile and dengue, even with the travel history. I think just because West Nile circulates so much here, and so we did have to try to get a few specimens to send off for that PRT testing. And from what I remember, the ones that had the good travel history to an area where dengue was circulating, those were all confirmed to be dengue and not West Nile.
Thank you for that. That's helpful. And I may follow up with you or ask Chris Roundy to follow up with you offline about getting our mosquitoes PRNT'd. Abelardo, nice to see you.
Hey, thank you. Just to follow up on that also, we do in Tennessee mosquito testing for SLE as well as West Nile. So that's our way of getting an idea if it's circulating. And we do it by PCR, which I think Jeff probably does it that way as well. And I do want to comment real quick on dengue. Um, I'm just aware of the numbers because I traveled to Brazil in March. Uh, and I think at the time that there were 6 million cases reported. Um, and I recently traveled to Puerto Rico to give a talk about dengue there. Um, so I think the numbers that we're seeing for dengue this year have predominantly come from Brazil. I think the last time I checked, it was over 10 million cases from Brazil. And in the Americas, total is like maybe around 14 million. Um, so certainly Puerto Rico is seeing a large outbreak right now, um, but it's not reaching the numbers that, we're not talking millions, um, but it's certainly many, many cases. I think it might be around 5,000 by now, confirmed cases. So there's probably others that have not been tested. And of course, the co-circulation, as you mentioned, of serotypes is really important too. But I guess the good news is that the season for that transmission is going down. So we should be seeing less cases, but of course that's going to rise again next year. So yeah, that was my comments about that.
Thank you very much. I'm not as aware of the activity outside the United States, so it's always really, really good for me to get a check on what's happening internationally. Now, I guess I'll answer this one. Let's see. We did have a comment from Victoria asking if the slides for this webinar would be available, and I'm working on getting permission to share those slides. So stay tuned. We will send out an email when and if that happens. And Brenda from the Pueblo Health Department is asking if their travel clinic is contacted by a patient who they suspect has dengue, do we recommend testing through the commercial labs? And Brenda, I would say it's a little bit dependent on the timing of the symptoms because of the potential for a PCR test versus the IgM only. If there are questions about how to test for dengue, I would encourage you to reach out to our team, and that is our team email address. And one of our EPIs can get back to you and talk through when the symptoms started, where they traveled, and what kind of testing is most likely to be helpful. And as an aside, anyone in Colorado or people who do zoonotic disease work outside of Colorado, if you ever need to get a hold of the CDPHE Zoonoses in One Health team, that email will catch all of us. Okay, we've got a couple minutes left. Could anyone, I don't know, comment on future topics they think would be useful for this webinar? Keeping in mind that vector-borne disease will be the focus. Much as I love rabies, I will not be talking about rabies on this call. Or even if it's not a specific topic, like a group of professionals or, oh, flea-borne typhus. I would love to discuss that too, Kelly. I will remember that. That sounds like a great plan. We may be in contact trying to find a good speaker about flea-borne typhus. Sounds good. Any like aspects of vector control that would be interesting to discuss? Like, I know one of the things that I have loved having with the RaHP VEC group is access to the folks who are doing research in these fields and what they're doing and what they're finding and what interesting control methods are coming through. Abelardo Oropouche is on our list. We're waiting for a little more of the data about vector competency to come out so that we can have more interesting stuff about risk in there. And I'm seeing Bonnie Mays. Okay, Bonnie has been voluntold for flea-borne typhus.
She'll probably be mad at me for that, but she loves talking about typhus. She knows everything about typhus. So it's reportable in Texas and not in, every state since it's not nationally notifiable. So we do have some kind of interesting data from our side.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll look into that. So I think it's reportable in Colorado, but we very rarely see cases. Like I can't remember the last time we saw a case. Kamisha, and hopefully I pronounced your name right, I apologize if I didn't, is asking for tick-borne relapsing fever, which is reportable in Colorado, and we do get We do get cases of soft tick relapsing fever, so we can I'm adding that to the list. I did say it right. Oh, there you go. And Kamisha, I remember you from Zika times. I think that's when I first contacted you, way back when. Anything else that would be of particular interest to this group? And again, feel free to reach out and let me know if you think of something, or if you have a speaker in mind who we could torture like Bonnie Mays. Well, if not, we can all have 10 minutes back in our days, which I'm sure everyone appreciates as much as I do. Keep an eye out for more webinars to come from RaHP VEC. And hopefully you'll help us all find the right balance between the public health stuff, which is where I live, and the vector control things and the academic research, etc. Thank you so much, everyone.